Um, recording is in progress. Welcome to Roy and Anne, Kate, Wendy. I'm expecting a few more people to join us on the basis of people who registered. But I will just start us off with one or two notices. So if you can bear with me, Roger.
Yes, of course.
We're waiting for a couple more people to join. I will give out some notices. Yeah, first of all, obviously, good evening to members of the John Hampden Society and our guests from the Bucks Local History Network. My name is Becca Rogers. I'm your chair. And for the remainder of the meeting, if I could ask you to mute your microphones and stop your videos, this will improve the sound quality from Roger as speaker. So if you could all do that, please, that would be very helpful. Thanks for that, and also some notices. As you know, our Zoom talks so far have been free talks, but we do ask you to make a donation to the speaker's chosen cause. And you can do this evening either via the John Hampden Society, so that we can realise some gift aid and pass on the bundle of donations and round that up for Roger's work for the parish on the artefacts. Or Roger is going to tell you about his Just Giving page. So whichever you find more convenient. If you're a member, you might find giving a donation to the society more convenient because you've already got the payments details set up. Or if you are a guest, you might find Roger's Just Giving page easier. So guests, welcome. Please do consider joining us. And many of the benefits of membership are listed on the website, but I would just bring to your attention one, which is that we are shortly going to produce the 100th edition of our quarterly newsletter. And this is going to be a bumper edition, including an item from the Speaker of the House of Commons and an update from John Hampden School. Members, we, your committee members, are not getting any younger, and we welcome any offers of help to do things or new ideas about things that could be done. So please let us know if you're available. Okay, everybody, right. Well, I think now we should hand over to our guest speaker this evening. I'm delighted to introduce you one of our new members, Roger Howgate, who is a celebrated local historian in Great Kimble, I would think. He's written this fantastic book, which I'm trying to make sure that it's visible with this background effect, but I think you can probably just see the Kimble's journey bit, the history of England from the perspective of a rural parish. It is fantastic. It's packed with facts, diagrams, illustrations, photos. Anybody who loves the Kimbles will love this book. And even if it's more general, that you're interested in South Bucks and its history, and it's well written, easy to read, well, as you can gather, I enjoyed it. Okay, so Roger, local historian, author of a lovely book. You're going to talk to us this evening about the restoration of some artifacts relating to John Hampden. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Well, thank you very much. That's very welcoming. You've been very kind about my book. Hello. Normally I make a few introductory remarks and try and sort of get a sense of the meeting, but I do find in Zoom this is a little bit difficult to do. So I'm just going to go straight ahead with the slideshow. I had a bad experience with the slideshow previously when all the clever bits didn't work, so I've kept it very simple. And first of all, I'll make the general historian's general disclaimer that everything I say is to the best of my knowledge based on evidence. And if there's other evidence that you know of, please, you're welcome at the end to correct me on any fact or suggest any other information that I might not be aware of, because I'm not actually an expert on John Hampden. My main area of study has been actually Great Kimble. And what I'm trying to do today is two things: to give some kind of context and detail on the events of January 1635, when John Hampden and his tenants and neighbours rejected the payment of ship money.
Okay.
So that's one of the things I'm going to do. The other thing I'm going to do is to talk a little bit about how John Hampden is regarded as a bit of a neighbour in Kimble, and people actually talk about him in Kimble as if he's almost still alive. And there's a very strong sort of oral tradition and a very strong sort of folk tradition in Kimble to do with John Hampden. Do need to also cover myself following a previous experience. Now, in 1997, which I'm now shocked to realise is nearly 25 years ago, I was asked to give a talk by Kimble Church on John Hampden, and I gave a talk in the church. And I was aware of one rather large gentleman with a lot of hair who did seem to go down rather badly. I thought I was expecting to have a dozen people, and there were actually 80 people there. So it was quite a large audience. But this rather large gentleman did a lot of sighing and eye rolling and feet shuffling. And at the end, he held forth at considerable length on 2 points. One was that the John Hampden Society hadn't been informed of this talk, and how dare somebody give a talk without getting their permission. But I don't know if you can see, but I've got my little John Hampden badge on. So I am a member of the John Hampden Society now. So I consider myself licensed to talk on John Hampden. So that was one issue that interesting. I'm member 412, so I can't help wondering if there's some long established member who's 007. Anyway, that's covered that bit of it. The other bit was he took exception to some remarks I made about Lord Nugent. Now, you may be well aware that Lord Nugent wrote a life of John Hampden. He was an eminent sort of Whig historian from Victorian times. And in fact, I'm not going to say anything about Lord Nugent on this occasion. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to take issue with another noble Whig historian from Victorian times, Lord Macaulay, who gives a very colourful account of events of January 1635, which I'm afraid I must take issue with. Okay, so my specialist was actually world politics in the first half of the 20th century. So when I came to Kimble, I found an amazing oral tradition here, and it was rapidly dying out because as old people died, a lot of the oral tradition went. So we put it all together. We wrote one book, which was mainly photographs, which is a sort of nostalgia book to celebrate the millennium. And then I wrote Kimble's Journey. Okay, and there's a website for Kimble's Journey. So if you wanted to purchase Kimble's Journey at any stage, please get in touch. Okay, so part one, we're going to talk about the Hampden connections with Kimble, because of course Hampden naturally is associated with Great Hampden, but Kimble played a big part in Hampden. And this is Kimble Parish. It's a strip parish, 2 strip parishes put together from the Chilterns, and the Chilterns run from sort of bottom left-hand corner, top right-hand corner on the map. And strip parishes were there to make sure that everybody got a share of different types of agricultural land. So whether you were on the chalk or on the clay, and so forth. A particularly extreme example was Elizabeth Simeon, who was the first wife of John Hampden. Her parish, which was the parish of Purton, which has now been amalgamated, is actually 12 miles long and half a mile wide. So they can be very long, narrow parishes. But most parishes are about 6 miles long, half a mile wide, 3/4 of a mile wide. This parish goes back to 903 because our neighbouring parish of Monk Risborough has a charter from 903. And the parish is very important up to 1885, as I'm sure you know, because until county councils came along, they played a really major part. And in 1635, there were a number of parish officials, parish constables, roadseer for the roads, and of course the church warden. And the church warden, the chief church warden in 1635 was actually John Hampden. And this sort of shows you a bit of the geographical background. Here's Hampden House. And then up here, we've got the manor house in Kimble, which no longer exists, but there's a ditch. There's a rectangular ditch there. And that's Great Kimble Church, which was important because it was used for sort of a government business in the area. Stoke Mandeville Parish Church at that stage, the old parish church, was tiny. So in fact, the neighbouring parishes did use Kimble Church because it was the largest. The blue line you can see is the border between the lands of the Hampdens, John Hampden at this stage, and the lands of his neighbour at Chequers, who was of course married to a niece of Oliver Cromwell. Although in some books it claims it was Cromwell's daughter, but I think that's a confusion over names. Another interesting thing, perhaps, from this map is the wooden house, which is here. The wooden house played a part in Hampden in 1635, rather similar to there's a famous room at Broughton Castle where Lord Say and Sale had secret meetings, and the wooden house at what's now the old rifle range at Kimble, that was in fact John Hampden's little out of the way house where he could hold confidential meetings. But okay, we'll go on to the next slide. The next slide is sort of zoomed in on Kimble. We've got St Nicholas Church here and the clergy house. Now the clergy house is important because that's where a meeting took place where John Hampden and his tenants and neighbours made a collective decision not to pay ship money. And in a lot of the literature, it says it's to the north of the church. This is because the church runs north-south as opposed to east-west, and most churches run east-west. So that confuses people. It's now part of a farm. It's now part of Manor Farm. And you can see where the manor house was. And I've moved rather too rapidly on. You can see where the manor house was. And you can see where the grange and the barns for the manor house was. It's quite interesting to see. You can see all the earthworks. If you go there, there's a very deep ditch here with water in it, which was part of the moat. And a very big earthworks here. So that's the sort of geographical background to the Hampdens at Kimble. And this is going again slightly closer. This is this is the ancient monument, EHLID 29406, which is the site of the old manor house, the site of the old village, which was wiped out in 1350, and what the Royal Commission on Historical Monuments thinks is a defensive earthwork. I don't agree, and I think if you go there, you'll see why. This is a drawing of the roof of the clergy house, which became a barn. It has a listed roof, now a residence, part of a residence. Okay, and this is a 1635 Chequers estate map, which is rather convenient, 1635, and you can see on it the wooden house headed Mr. Hampden's Warren, and the nearby wood, Bullpit Wood and Ponds Wood, which it mistakenly says is in Elthborough Parish because it's nice in Great Kimble Parish. Still, some of these ancient maps are really interesting for lots of reasons. And just to underline the point that the Hampdens were very influential in Kimble, and Kimble played a big part in their core estate. After the fiasco of 1720, when they lost most of their land, it was confiscated by Parliament, they retained the Kimble estate. So, and you can hear, this is the 1805 enclosure map, and you can see that still Lord Viscount Hampden's lands were there. And the wooden house was still there, although the manor house had gone by that time. So that's a bit of the geographical background. I'd like to also say a little bit about the church. I won't go on at great length of the church because we're interested in John Hampden rather than the church. But there are a number of interesting things about the church and how it relates to the Hampden family. And that's the church as it was in 1881 when it had just been restored. And unfortunately, in the restoration, they generally did a good job, but they removed a drain pipe. There used to be a drain pipe running from the top of the tower to the ground, there to there. And the Victorians didn't like an unsightly drain pipe, so they removed it. And instead, they cut slots in the battlements and let the water drop onto the roof. And we've had trouble with the roof ever since. So that wasn't a good engineering decision. Okay. And just to show you a couple of photographs of the church, you can see it's a 14th century church, basically. And but remember, it runs north-south. So if you're going along the road from Risborough to Aylesbury, it runs parallel with the road. That's a view from the other side where the clergy house was. There's the graveyard, and then there's Manor Farm, which has the clergy house. And oops, sorry. That's rather an exciting looking item, is in fact a medieval parish chest. So probably some of John Hampden's documents, well, certainly some of John Hampden's documents resided in there for a time, because it was 300 years old when he in 1635. And that's the font. I won't talk too much about the font, except to say it's a very beautiful font. According to the Victorian history of Bucks, Cromwell's soldiers rolled it round the graveyard. Certainly it was taken out of the church and to a certain extent vandalized. And it became a huge source of conflict between the Hampden family and the church after John Hampden's death under Richard Hampden, later Edmund Hampden. And in the end, it was in the graveyard. We know it was in the graveyard in 1820 when a survey was done. And in fact, it was buried because local villagers were getting local priests come along and still use the font in the graveyard to do outside baptism. So the Hampden family ordered it to be buried. So it was buried in the ground for a time. Anyway, we're all friends now. And these are the bells. Now, the bells might give us a clue as to why there was this conflict between the Hampden family and the church. And I'd like to emphasize it wasn't a problem in John Hampden's time for whatever reason. Maybe he was good diplomatically, a good organizer. I think that's probably the reason. But you've got here two Victorian bells, one set up by James Ormond. Now, James Ormond was our first priest for 70 years because the Hampden family's patience with Kimble Parish finally snapped. And they arranged for the parish to be abolished and annexed Great Hampden Parish. So we ceased to be a parish. The clergy house became a farm because they sold the clergy house. And we didn't have a vicar or rector, we had a curate who came down from Great Hampden. So James Ormond managed to get this reversed, and he built a really nice big rectory, which we subsequently had to sell, unfortunately, to the editor of Punch, actually. If any of you remember the mildly satirical magazine Punch, we sold our rectory to him. And the bell that you can just about see lurking behind the wheel here, I was hanging over the bell tower to take this photograph. It was 1587. Now, in 1587, Mary Queen of Scots was executed. Pope issued a bull saying it would be legal for a Catholic to kill Queen Elizabeth I. The Spanish began a preparation for an invasion. Francis Drake attacked Cadiz and burned a number of ships. And interestingly, more significantly, he burned a warehouse full of barrel staves. And this meant when the next year the Spanish Armada set out, all the barrels started to go rotten because they didn't have them properly matured barrel staves had all been burned by Francis Drake. Anyway, the interesting thing on this bell, and I didn't believe it, so I went up there and looked, and it is true. And the thing on this bell, the engraving on this bell says, Ave Maria Gratia Plena, Hail Mary, full of grace. Well, if you could get anything more provocative to a Puritan than that, I'd like to know what it is. So that kind of gives us to a clue as to why there was this later vendetta between the Hampden family and the church. But as I said, we're all friends now because later on a member of the Hampden family became a rector. This is a rather nice table. The altar also went, and the altar rails. And we were given this table, the 1635 table. I'd like to emphasize that was under John Hampden's successors. But somehow John Hampden, who was a churchwarden, managed to keep things relatively diplomatic and friendly. But under his successors, I'm afraid he went from bad to worse. Mind you, people in Kimble are quite awkward, so I mean, you can understand the Hampden family is annoying. Showing you this is my next restoration scheme. This is a wall burial for Anne Oxley, 1685. What's remarkable about this is the name of Thomas Statham, because Thomas Statham signed the older document, 1635 document, so he's still around 50 years later. He lived to be a very old man, apparently. And that's Arthur Kennett, Hobart Hampden. Now, I've been told by a very posh lady I should pronounce it Hubbard Hampden. But I'm sorry, I'm going to be defiant about this and call it Hobart Hampden. Okay? And his name was Kennett. That's not a misspelling. Why his name was Kennett, I dread to think. Anyway, he became our first rector when the parishes of Great and Little Kimble were put together. Bizarrely, and I'm sure there's a story behind this, the first thing Buckinghamshire County Council did in 1885 when they were formed was set about uniting the parishes of Great and Little Kimble. You'd have thought they got slightly more significant things to do as a newly formed parish council, but that they did. And in a tradition, which has become a tradition in Buckinghamshire, they made a complete mess of it. It took the church 6 years to get their part done, but they started in 1885. By 1895, Buckinghamshire County Council had still not succeeded in getting the proper paperwork done, at which point Queen Victoria stepped in and gave an order in council which united the two parishes. So our parishes were united through an order in council by Queen Victoria herself. Anyway, Arthur Kennett was our rector, and he gave us 3 gifts. One was a little chapel in honor of his mother. And if you look above the altar, you can see these eagles. These eagles, which should be black actually, but they're in gold, are the sign of the on the coat of arms of the Hampden family. And there are also some cressets, or sort of fiery stars, which I think are the De Vere family. Anyway, there is one slightly awkward thing about this theologically, in that he's got a window in there, which has got an annunciation, the angel announcing to the Virgin Mary. And the Virgin Mary has the face of his mother. And I'm thinking, he's setting himself a rather high standard there, isn't he? Because if the Virgin Mary is his mother, who is he? So we'll perhaps move over on that one. Okay. And he also left in his will an amount for a rather nice oak screen for the bell tower, because the bell ringers in those days were a rather rowdy lot at the beginning, around about the First World War time, and they used to stand on the floor of the tower to ring. So he had a bell gallery built and a screen to keep them out. Okay, now that's another tradition that's gone on. Unfortunately, now that the Bernard Arms has closed, the bell ringers and the organist, who is myself, no longer go over the pub after the service. Okay, part 3 then. We're looking at the document, the actual document, MS 1424 FO 440, is it? 44, which I assume stands for manuscript 142 folio 44, and is in the Stowe Temple of Stowe papers. So this was a copy of a document drawn up at the time, and it was sent to the High Sheriff of Bucks, and that's a document. And this is a handmade copy that he had made. Well, I'm pretty sure it's a handmade copy because I can't think they had photocopying facilities back in 1900 odd. I think it's probably a handmade replica. Fortunately for us, it's not the original, which would be worth, no doubt, a vast sum of money that resides in the British Library, although there was a little scheme at one stage, I think, by the denizens of Stowe to actually sell it to America, but they sold a lot of their papers to America. But I think there was a bar put on this one. What it is John Hampden arranged a meeting of the vestry. Now, a lot of tourists come and they're very disappointed and ask to be shown the vestry, and it's a small room with lots of bits and odds of church furniture in it. And of course, a vestry meeting doesn't mean a meeting in the church vestry. It means a meeting of the important members of the parish community, presided over by one John Hampden, the chief churchwarden. So when I say John Hampden was the churchwarden, don't imagine him handing out prayer books or organising the church faith. It's that it's an important, in those days, an important administrative and responsible task. And I could sort of try to read it, but what I did instead was I made a fair copy, so this is a record of the meeting of the vestry committee, which took place in the clergy house. And basically, it says at the bottom, we return our warrant and the names herein written for refusing such money as are herewith assessed by the assessors for the raising of the sum of £21, 11 shillings and 5p. Now, it's an interesting fact that this is the second fact. So what I mean by Kimble people being awkward, Little Kimble had already done this 300 years before. They returned a tax warrant in 1330 and refused to pay. So I'm afraid Kimble people have got a bit of a record on this. A number of interesting things. John Hampden at the top, of course, he's assessed at £31.06, but £31 shillings and 6pence, sorry, I beg your pardon. And in fact, in the record, when it came to court in 1637, it wasn't for that sum. And the reason was he paid part of it and didn't pay all. He didn't pay the bit on Stoke Mandeville, he paid the bit on Kimble. And there are a number of very familiar Kimble names here. Thomas East, the Easts. Sadly, one of the East was killed in the First World War. There's Thomas Statham, if you remember, signed the wool license in 1685. There are 4 women on it. There's Mrs. Westall, who obviously owned property in her own right, and then 3 widows: Widow Bampton, Widow Goodchild, and Widow Temple. So women were obviously assessed for tax at that stage. There are 1 or 2 other familiar names. Thomas Rutland, the Rutlands. Mrs. Rutland used to live opposite us, actually. And so their family remained in the village for a long time. The Goodchilds, there's a Goodchilds there in the middle. The Goodchilds were very strong in the Baptist church, and they've only just left the village. The last Goodchilds left because they couldn't stand the road noise from the 409, but they've moved to Dinton. So there are lots of people there. The Clarks as well, they're actual Clarks family. But there are also lots of people who, somebody interesting, Richard Blackwell, who would no longer be in the parish. Where's my arrow gone? There we are. Richard Blackwell there. Yes, he had a very colourful life. He was in the Muscovy Company and went to Russia and wrote a book about it, in which he made himself out to be a bit of a James Bond character. He was buried under the church floor somewhere. And the Victorians were pretty robust about the church floor, so we've got lots of people under there and we don't know who they are. Anyway, so that's the document, and subsequently you'll see as well that Peter Aldridge and Thomas Lane, who were the assessors, they've signed the document, they've refused to pay. Similarly, John Goodchild and Thomas Rutland, the constables, they've refused to pay as well. Now, this is where I'm going to fall out with the noble lord, because according to Lord Macaulay, John Hampden booted and spurred and made his way by horseback from Hampden on the Hill through the beech woods on a crisp January day, and sort of face down the assessors. Well, they'd actually got the assessors to sign the bill, and this ties in with what our last person, Dr. Nungasser, was saying, that in fact John Hampden managed enormous estates. Hampden estates were all over in Lincolnshire, in Essex, everywhere, and he was a good manager. And he got all this done through the process. He took the process, he got the official meeting, he actually got people to sign up. It was all done and dusted and sorted. Now, somebody may now produce a memoir from John Hampden's ostler saying it was a crisp January day. That January, we don't know, obviously, have weather forecasts. That January was particularly wet, foggy, so it seems unlikely. I don't think he came down from Great Hampden. I think he probably wouldn't bother going back there and back. He probably stayed overnight at and he didn't. If he did come down from Kimble, from Hampden on the Hill, he didn't go through any woodlands, because, as I pointed out, the woodlands were all 19th century woodland, 18th century woodlands. Ninwood and Sergeant Wood were planted at that time. It would have been a clear journey down, but he certainly didn't make a big scene of it. It was all very well managed, all under control, and that's my picture of the incident of 1935. Okay, now there's we did have a problem. In about 1999 it was, we got the roof done in lead, and we discovered that somebody in the 1920s who generously re-leaded our roof at that time had been ripped off. Some of the roof hadn't been done to lead. Anyway, And then the price of scrap lead went up. So we had visitors on no less than 5 occasions. And this is what happened to the roof. They can't have been very bright, actually, because they started on the top roof, and it would be much easier to start on the lower roof. But they threw a lot of stuff down. They broke the parapets down, and water just cascaded in. And the Hobart Hampden gift of the facsimile was fell off the wall and was smashed and finished up in a pool of water. So I had to recover that without cutting my hands too badly. And I managed to sort of rescue it and digitize it and prepare a display using it while putting it to one side. So it's kept in a safe place now. But we do have a display, which is, I suppose, a facsimile of the facsimile. You can also see on the roof where I've put in 2 4-inch drains, put a 4-inch drain in there, 4-inch drain in there to try and drain some of the water off. Put in some roofing felt and battens and things, try to put a tarpaulin on the roof. So anyway, we got the roof redone, and we finally persuaded them to allow us to do some of the roof anyway, replacement in a composite rather than lead, because otherwise we'd be still backwards and forwards to this day. And that's the display, which you can't see very well. But the original display was just the facsimile and a plain copy. I've put added a bit to it. And it's taken some years for the church authorities to agree for it to be put back up. To be fair, there was a complication in that where it was originally, you couldn't put it back up because the church had been reordered, and you couldn't put it back in there because that would now be inside a cover. But so at some stage, we're going to put this up, and we're going to invite the John Hampden Society to come along and say hello to us and celebrate, hopefully. Right, there was another Hampden related thing, and that's the St Nicholas Church sign. And this was a painting done, we believe, in the 1950s, and it was a sign for the village, and it celebrates St Nicholas, and you can see there's St Nicholas with his 3 gold coins, which of course is a sign of a pawnbroker, because he's the patron saint of pawnbrokers. And he's also the patron saint of children, and he has such a busy little chap, yes, because he's the patron saint of sailors. And I'm constantly interested in why so many churches in Bucks are named after St Nicholas, patron saint of sailors, when it's the furthest county from the sea. But there it is. This sort of rather charming, naive painting it's sort of 2'6" in old money, 2'6" by 4 foot, like an old-fashioned pub sign. So we had this sign, and that's how it is in the graveyard. This side has already been done, not very well. This sign, they used cheap acrylic paint, and it's virtually black and white now. Okay, so this was the sign, and I didn't have a chance to photograph me taking it down. So what we did was I put up a platform, and myself and another person started to think about taking it down with ropes and things. I suddenly realized that I'd picked the one person who was as practical as myself, and this was not going to end well. So I shut my eyes and said a little prayer that this would go all right. And the power of prayer worked perfectly, because the leading person in the whole of Buckinghamshire who was appropriate for the situation was walking past with his dog. His name was Jeremy Burton, and he runs a business, rather niche business, specialised in moving valuable artifacts. He intervened and got us to take it down, and you can see it, terrible wet damage. It's covered in mould. All the varnish was peeling off, so it had to be kept in the dark for a year in a cool, dark place. And then this looks terrible. Well, actually wasn't a big problem. It only took us a few hours. Tweezers and makeup brushes. I did get a strange look from the girl in boots when I went to put 3 makeup brushes actually. And we've removed that cheap acrylic varnish, it just peeled off. You hop it over with a vacuum cleaner. But then it was quite a mess, and there's big patches. Somebody put really thick yellow varnish on part of it, and it got all yellow and it pooled. So it's that they'd obviously done it when it was lying flat instead of when it was upright. So anyway, what we then did was we started to clean off the varnish. We bought this incredibly expensive stuff Bonhams are supposed to use at £50 a jar, and it was completely useless. We finished up using artist turpentine, managed to get most of it off, and that's Ella, who's working very hard on that with her makeup brush. And then we had two lots of paint, one of green, one of orange, which completely bubbled up, flaked off. We couldn't glue it down. So you had to get sharp blades and cut it or lift it all off. So that's what we did then. And then we finished up with some bare patches. So we thought, oh, blimey, how are we going to cover this? And all the experts said, oh, well, you need rabbit glue and you need you need special gesso made from egg whites and stuff like that. So we just bought this £8 jar of stuff, and it was brilliant, and it did the job. So we got that covered. And then Ella started painting. She matched up the colours very well. And so we improved on parts of it because the stones weren't very good. The lettering was a real challenge. That's only the first coat that went on. But she knew what she was doing because she did a more refined lettering over the top when she got the basic. And the red lettering at the top was really difficult because it was a really fancy font with lots of serifs and so forth on. And she did that really well. Why is she charged? They charged enough for the paintbrushes. Was paying out 15 quid for paintbrushes. Those paintbrushes. And you can see the reference here to John Hampden, born 1594, died 1543, 1643. Patron and patriarch at a protest meeting against the ship money tax in 1655. And it's interesting, isn't it, that this obviously means so much to people in the village. Never had so many people come and thank me and offer to buy me drinks. It's done very well done on drinks. This. We did have a problem when we'd finished with John Hampden's face, because, and only people over 60 will understand this reference, he looked rather like Charlie Chan. So we had Ella actually very well basically repainted the face. So she did a good job on that. And that's the finished article. So, well, it's not quite finished because it takes 6 months for it to cure because it's oil paint. So after the oil paint's cured, there'll be touching up to do. And then we'll have to do various things. We'll have to glaze it. We'll have to work on the frame. I've already started working on the post. So finally, we'll rehang it. And we'll rehang it at the same time as we rehang the facsimile document. And we will invite the John Hampden Society to come. So as soon as I got a date, I'll let you know. Okay, I've tried to keep this light-hearted, but there's actually some serious points here. First of all, Dr. Nungata said, I think, well, that's my interpretation. John Hampden was a very good manager, planned and prepared the refusal, got everybody on side. In the end, we refused to pay only an assessment on Stoke Mandeville parish. So it wasn't a dramatic and extravagant gesture. It was very well thought out, very well managed. And I think if you look at the contrast between John Hampden and some other members of the parliamentary side in the Civil War, you see he was very good at, very often John Pym gives a 3-hour speech on something and then John Hampden gets up and says, my gloss on what he said, not in these words, okay guys, this is what we need to do. And I think that the document actually bears that out. The second point is that John Hampden still strikes a chord in the area of pop culture. talked about as he's part of the village, and the village sign celebrates him, and people. It was interesting that the church in 1997 just gave out a very small advert that I would be giving this speech, and 80 people turned up. So I think that shows it is still a very living thing in Kimble Parish. Another thing I think this whole process suggests to me is that the oral tradition remembers John Hampden. The oral tradition in Kimble is still very strong. And there's lots of stories about John Hampden we'll never know. Apparently, supposedly, his second wife, Lettice Knowles, not the Lettice Knowles who was the cousin, presumably her granddaughter. Second wife is apparently Mike dogs. So I have this nice picture of John Hampden and his wife rowing about dogs. Did he avoid a house on the hill after the death of his first wife? I don't know. Nobody can tell. I wonder if there's not something of death warrior going on there. Right. Finally, the final point I'd like to make, and that this came out in my book, hopefully. When I was writing the book, a woman came up to me and said, rather, I thought snarkily and sarcastically, oh, there's going to be lots about record breaking large carrots, are there? And it was interesting, and we've seen a little bit of this to do with the document, that things that happen nationally, there's this idea that local history is all about, pride carrots and people living in the same place forever and not being involved in national affairs and so forth. But in fact, see that rural settlements weren't just necessarily about waters. The religious divisions, like the religious division between Kimble Parish and the Hampdens, that was a national thing that played out locally. You go back slightly further, one member of the Hampden family left Kimble Church in 1485 as commissioner of array for bucks with troops to fight alongside Richard III. Hampden up the hill, his cousin, left in the middle of the night to go to Essex with some of his followers to join together with the forces of the Earl of Oxford, fighting for the Lancastrians. Both of them were killed. So the other cousin, who was alongside Henry VII, as then he became, in the entourage of the Earl of Salisbury, scooped the pot, and he became the Hampden, head of the Hampden family. So national things play out at local level. It's not that, we're, people in Kimble are a bunch of yokels who just wear their smocks, right? These things affected the village. And we get this in the 19th century. And I'm afraid I'm very irritated with this stuff about women got the vote because of Mrs. Pankhurst and because Emily Wilding Davidson were herself at the King's Horse. Women got the vote partly because of the war, but partly because during the 19th century, there were a whole series of movements, particularly in Kimble, I noted, women getting together and organising a school, first of all a Sunday school, then a school organised by the women in the village, various women's movements, including the Mothers' Union, the Band of Hope, various women's movements. And women, interestingly in Kimble, founded Kimble Cricket Club. It took the men 3 years to get themselves organised. Kimble Cricket Club was originally founded in 1904 by the women of Kimble. So what I'm saying is, and maybe this is just me, I think not, that a lot of people think, and I certainly tended to think of local history as being just about thatching and, lace making and stuff like that. In fact, these movements played out at the local level, not just a national level, at a local level. There are lots of other things, for instance, random things like discovered, this is amazing, prepare to be impressed, discovered from Spanish secret diplomatic record. Also Swedish Queen of England. Catherine Parr, the official records on Catherine Parr say she was born at Blackfriars Nunnery in London. She wasn't, she was born in Little Kimble. She stopped off at Little Kimble. A relative, distant cousin of hers, was the rector of Little Kimble. And no doubt, having travelled over the rough roads of those times, he actually gave birth to Catherine Parr, who later became Queen of England. So these odd little events, also, when you think of all these odd little events, well, they happen somewhere, and they happen in local areas. And I bet if people look into their own parishes, they'll find a similar pattern. I'm sure Kimble isn't unique. A lot of people say Kimble's unique. They say people from Kimble are unique, but I don't think so. Anyway, thank you for being very patient and listening to me going on. I hope everybody managed to stay awake. What do I do now?
If you could stop sharing, screen,
Right.
Roger, and then we can, or at least I can get a gallery view of everybody, I hope. Gallery, let's try that. Yes. Okay, now, good people out there. If you would like to ask Roger a question, there is on your bar at the bottom a button called reactions. And if you click on reactions, you should get the option to raise your hand. If for any reason you don't have that bar or that option, then by all means just dip in. But just initially, as there may be a flurry of questions, if you could raise your hand, that would be great. No hand. Ah, Jim.
Oh, hello. Am I muted? Can you hear me?
No, we can hear you.
All right. I'd like to thank John very much for his efforts. I think it's brilliant. I've got one thing to support him in this: the way that John Hampden organised other people to support him. I've looked at some of his letters in the Bodleian to the Earl of Essex, and he doesn't just sign it himself. He gets 2 or 3 other officers to sign it with him. So he's collecting other people at the time he makes the comment. When they're trying to persuade Essex to do something, it's not just John Hampden. He's obviously thought about who else should be involved in this and bring supporters together. So it just reinforces John's thought about Roger's thought about how he organised the list of non-payers. So it's a support of that. And I'm just very interested in the Woodhouse and what is there left of it now at all.
The clergy house, it's a barn, and the roof is listed, but I've never seen it. Because
I was thinking, is this the Woodhouse where he had the secret?
Oh, the wooden house. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Sorry, the wooden house.
No, the wooden house. I can take you to the point and say the wooden house used to be here, and there's a little flat area of ground where it used to be. I'm afraid it burned down in Victorian times. Yeah. With all due respect to the Trevors, I mean, they didn't spend a lot of attention on the estate at that time. And no, it burned down, sadly. And then what happened then was the land was bought by the University of London Rifle Club, and they used it as a rifle range. Right. And then the 2nd Battalion, the Coldstream Guards, took it over, and it became a rifle range for them in the war. And I once tobogganed down there with my granddaughter, who the granddaughter you saw, I can say she was a lot smaller then, and we managed to toboggan all the way down. And the man challenged us on this and said, "How did you manage to get all the way down?" And I said, "Well, I had a proper toboggan because he had a tray." And then I realised it was David Cameron, the Prime Minister. Brilliant. So, yes, it is, as I say, I can take you to the spot, but
I could just say that in your comment about the way local things have national implications, and that the Puritan conversion that carried on for Calvinism did come from, it was a sort of a bottom-up conversion where a lot of the country converted, and the state was running a bit behind times, you know. So there were a number of, that's just where you get the local people were ahead of the game in becoming Puritans, more Puritan than the people in the middle of things.
Yes,
So
I think that's very much the case. I found something that completely left fielded me when I did the research. In the 19th century in Kimble, the women, organisation of the women,
yeah,
you know, towards, you know, where I had always been taught it was all Mrs. Pankhurst. And, you know, this groundswell, as what you're saying about the Puritans, that
that's it.
groundswell in the same way.
And yeah, so that was it. And I come from a village called Tillingham in Essex, and our church is, well, that church was St Nicholas, and Tillingham is sort of right next to the coast. So next stop is the other side, the North Sea.
Okay, do we have any other questions
That was it. Thank you.
around the Zoom room?
No denunciations this time. I'm disappointed. I thought somebody would.
Oh gosh, we've got so friendly. No longer so purist.
Where are we going?
Okay.
I think Sam knows who it was, actually.
Oh, possibly.
We know.
Okay, everybody. Well, thank you all very, very much indeed for joining us. And of course, thanks so much to Roger for a fascinating talk. I'd really like to remind people at this stage of the opportunity to donate to the work that's going on in Great Kimble Church to restore these artifacts. As mentioned, for members, you can donate via the society in that way. We can top up with your gift aid. Or Roger, do you want to tell us about the Just Giving page?
Right, yes, there's a Just Giving page, which is set up by our one of our church members, and it's justgiving.com, crowdfunding John Hampden. Justgiving.com, crowdfunding John Hampden. And she's off to South Africa, but when she comes back, she'll sort it all out. And, you know, we'd be very grateful for, you know, any kind of support, because, you know, it's a bit of a struggle sometimes to get, I'm not going to do the glazing myself, for instance. We did that last time. It's not happening again. We're going to get pretty professionally glazed this time. Right. I've got to somehow manufacture the fittings. Some of the fittings have gone. So, you know, there's things. It won't be spent on, well, the Bernard arms are on now, so it won't be spent in the Bernard. I can assure you of that.
Okay, right. Can I also mention to members of John Hampden Society, if anybody would like to volunteer to write a review of this talk for the 100th edition of the Patriot, which I mentioned earlier, that would be very gratefully received. And again, you know, thanks to guests and members who've come along this evening. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Does anybody have any final questions or queries about the talk or about any forthcoming events? If not, then your leave button is on the bottom right hand side in red. Oh, thank you, Jim.
Oh,
Jim,
not again. Oh, well, hang on.
Jim has found the applause button on the reactions. So
Jim,
that's lovely. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Jim. I hope you got over the cycle ride okay.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, I haven't really, but It's tough, but it's only thanks to women that I'm actually on this screen at all, really.
Oh, right. Yeah. So we what would we do without
We
it?
have that was what I was going to ask. Oh, the date of the AGM. That's what I wanted to know. There's things going on. It's be at Hampden House, won't it? But
That's right. March 27th is still the date. We have discovered from the Reverend that is Mothering Sunday, but we may find a little kind of theme there with John Hampden's mother. So at the moment, we're still expecting to stick with March 27th, Jim.
she was Oliver Cromwell's sister. She was the sister of Oliver Cromwell,
Mm-hmm.
his mother. So that's quite significant. Thank you very much. That was it.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Well, bye, everybody. Lovely to
Bye.
see you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye bye. Gone. That's it, is it? That's it. Isn't it?
Just a second.
Okay, I'm not sure whether we need Sam to actually close Anthea, but I think if
I
we
don't
both
know.
leave, then he'll be able to sort that out later.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Okay.
Well, good luck with you know, your health things, and we'll be in touch about various things. I did need to catch up with Sam, but I think he's so distracted with these other council things at the moment.
Yes.
Poor thing.
Right. He will let himself in for it.
Yeah, well, I let myself in for teaching in Finland last week. You know, lovely
yes.
country, lovely colleagues, lovely students, but getting there and back was such a pain.
Oh dear.
All this extra work and, you know, do tests when you return. Ugh.
Oh dear.
Anyway, there we go. Such is life.
Yeah.
I've been telling everybody, you know, next year is my last year. After that, I am, you know, just gonna have to find somebody else to do it.
Yeah. I've been saying that about being John Hampden's secretary for the last 20 years.
And I do keep asking for new volunteers, Anthea, but maybe we'll have to try and target somebody.
Yes. There we go. Anyway,
Okay.
speak to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Yeah. Bye.